So, coming at you from the shadow of Cheyenne Mountain in the Groin region number 6, I'm Will Stroh. Joining me today is the maintainer of the Q&A room. On my right, your left as you face the radio dial, whose hometown has yielded, I found out yesterday, no fewer than 6 Olympic figure skating champions. All the way from Simsbury, Connecticut, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Adolfo Campos. Now, before we get too carried away, if you haven't seen Cody Graves out in your channels lately, it's because he became a 3-time daddy the other week. So congratulate him, even though his wife did all the work. Feel free to send congratulations out in his channel or in your channels and tag him. And I know he was looking at Slack this morning, even though we told him not to. That being said, let's hop into things here. Now, as with our little summer school webinars over the next couple months, we're going straight into the deep end. If you got any questions, don't hesitate to raise them. Adolfo will kick them over my way. But without further ado, let's pop into things here. So for this month, we're talking about network troubleshooting. Now, you could actually take the network out of this troubleshooting methodology on the top here and really just say troubleshooting methodology. Define the problem, what changed? Is it a single client, multiple clients, reproducible? What do we got here? And if you can answer any of these, great. What you will note is we're not going to stress this from a support side. We don't want to be here reading a script to you guys. There's plenty of other storage companies you can go to that will read a script to you. If you want to know who they are, let me know, and I will be glad to share those with you on the Slack channel. However, being able to walk through this stack as it is really helps us find out where the issue lies and ultimately how we can go about fixing things out there. So, right off the bat, let's troubleshoot some ports. There is going to be a Cliff Notes cheat sheet at the end of this, just let you know, so don't feel obligated to copy things down here. You can just copy that last sheet, do a screen capture, pull it off YouTube, whatever, or heck, just ask in your channel. I'll post it out there. And then you can have all those commands handy. You can take them to the side of the cluster and forget about them. So right off the bat, old tried and true if config statement out there. Let's take a look at this real quick, and we'll just see what we're talking about here. So here's an if config on my sim. You can see it works if you have a simulator. Here's one on an actual cluster. So a couple things. We got our bond out here. Then we got our interfaces that are actually live. You can tell they're live because they're actually, this line here, they're actually kicking packets over there. What we're interested in here, mostly, outside of the fact if it's up or down, but really what we're looking for here is frame and carrier errors. Those are going to hold some bad juju as we go forward through this here. Typically, you'll see those increase when we have things such as port flapping, which we'll talk about in a second. So you're going to keep an eye out for those guys. Obviously, if this drop number is up there too, again, this is networking 101. If that drop number is up there, maybe might be worth a concern. Same with the error count. Statistically, though, you have to keep in mind how many packets I'm actually kicking through here. I don't know what this big number is here. Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It was like 20 billion read packets or something like that. Figure an equal number of transmit packets on the TX side. So we got 40 billion packets out there. That's a lot of bytes. Oh, here it says terabytes. Look at that. Handy. We got 55 terabytes of data flowing through there. If I have 1 or 2 drop packets, statistically, that's a 0. It's not going to matter. But if I have 8,000 frames, maybe that's a concern. It's really going to depend. And the reason I say that is none of these stats are going to 0 until the cluster's rebooted. Unfortunately, there's no way to do that. So when you're seeing networking issues, when you're trying to troubleshoot things, the key thing to keep in mind is, are things changing? Yes or no? So typically what I would do in a situation like this is, let's say we see a bunch of frame errors on Ethernet 2 here. What I do is I just do an if config, I type it correctly, eth2, then you can pipe this thing through a grep, frame, and then do a sleep 10, and then type it again, if config eth2 pipe rep frame. Cool. So in 10 seconds time, we're going to get another counter out there. Now, if I was actually having issues out here at this point, what you're looking for is this number changing? If it is, then you currently have an issue. If it's not, cool. Odds are those were when you're first setting up the cluster or sometime in the past, and you may not have had the link going happy to the switch. Who really knows? But at the end of the day, it's not changing now. You can always do an uptime out here too. In this case, this guy's up 63 days. Cool, no errors in 63 days. Just curious now, what's my sim sitting at here? Oh, 9 days. So if I had a ton of errors on the sim, well, I'm just going to redeploy the dang thing. But if it were an actual cluster and in 9 days, let's say I had 2,000 frame errors out here, I probably have an issue. Now, the question you should be asking yourself is, well, what do I do about this? And that's where we're going to move on down the line here. So next up, we have this handy dandy eth tool command. On the sim, it will show you. So again, if you have a sim handy, you can do this as well. Let's just take a look at the bond. So right off the bat, tail end of it, link detected. Cool. I got a bond out there. Here's my speed, 1,000 meg. Not a very fast one. Let's take a look at a real cluster. Alrighty, this guy's a little bit better. So we got a 10 gig link out here on my bond. Is that what I'm supposed to have? I have no idea off the top of my head. Probably not, because I don't know of any 5 gig network cards, but let's assume we have such a thing. In this case, what do I got for interfaces out here? I got ETH2, ETH3, ETH0, and ETH1. It looks like ETH2 is the only thing that's actually up. Now you can pull it out of proc bonding and see who you're supposed to be in there. But given that ETH2 is obviously up, ETH3 is also showing up, but probably doesn't have anything connected to it, is my guess. So let's take a look here. ETH2, ETH2, that's hard to say. So here's my 10 gig link coming over. Link detected, showing a yes. And some additional jibber jabber in here. Let's go ahead and take a look at ETH3. Hey, unknown across the board and link detected no. So right from just this information, if you were to tell me, hey, when I don't know, let's see here. Maybe I got a slow connection over to this cluster, over to node 5. I only got a 10 gig link to node 5. Now this is also going to show in the UI. If you go into network config, it'll show in the UI out there, or I'm sorry, cluster overview, that you only have a 10 gig link to this guy. But you can also pull all this again from the command line here. There's nothing magical here. You know, none of this is in sudo shell either at this point. So what can I do about this is the question. So the first thing I would take a look at, honestly, is I would come over here and say if config e3. And then I'd start taking a look at this guy. Now, in our example here, we have no packets transmitting over it. We know there's not a link detected on it. So one of two things, well, one of three things. In this case, it's either going to be the NIC card itself, the cable, or the SFP on either side if you happen to have an SFP on either side. It could also be the switch port, so maybe 4 things. Now, typically, you're not going to see a NIC card go out on you. In the near 7 years I've been here, I think I've probably seen maybe less than 10 NIC cards actually go bad. And of those 10, I'm not sure any of those were actually bad. When our dual port NICs fail, it's usually both ports fail at that point. So to see ETH3 offline, but ETH2 still there, typically I'm not going to be chasing down a NIC card right off the bat. More often, what I'd be looking for is the SFP or the cable at that point. Over the many years of doing support and troubleshooting things, I have seen some crazy network configurations. I've seen one very large customer out in California who thought 90-degree turns on a fiber cable was perfectly fine and acceptable. Let me tell you how many times that thing went up and down. Quite a few. So there are obvious things that you can go look for. It never hurts to simply get eyes on eyes on the prize there, if you will, and take a look at it and see from boots on the ground, is this thing actually in a quote unquote working configuration from that spot? So the other thing we can take a look at from ETH tool land, and this one you can't do on your sim, so you'd have to do it on a real cluster. But if you do an ETH tool -M, in this case, let's take a look at Ethernet 2. Whoa, this one we do have to have a sudo for. Let's throw that in there. All right, this is going to be looking at my SFP out there. So in this case, let's see, can we tell who made this thing? Fiberstore. That sounds like a futuristic company right there. So if we come through here, we can see any details that the SFP is going to give back to us, we can pull from here. Now with Fiberstore, it looks like we're not getting a whole lot of things out here, such as module temperature. With newer NICs, or newer SFPs rather, and certainly the FS ones I know will certainly tell you temperature settings out there. You can take a look out here and see if you're running hot. All of these NICs will, or all these SFPs, forgive me, they do have thresholds associated with them. We have seen some customers who will get upwards of 180 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius. I apologize to my out of the country listeners, but they will get toasty. And once you start getting up in those ranges, things don't work as well as they should. That's the nice way of putting it there. So, I guess I'm sorry, we don't have high alarms. We do have a temperature right here, 83 degrees. It's a lovely degree out there. So things don't work quite as well as they should once you hit the higher limits and start hitting those thresholds. So it is one thing to keep in mind, and what you would end up doing at that point. Let's say in our example here that node 5 is having a bad day. Let's hop over to node 4 and see what things are looking like over there. Again, this goes back to slide number 2 here. Is it reproducible? Are we seeing it on 1 or 2 things out there? Now, this flows into our next statement that we're going to be looking at, which is, whoa, not share there. Let's done that. Let's do slideshow. Rolls into our next statement out here of starting to swap things out. Now, in our example here on node 5, we know E3 is offline. So E3 on node 5 is not doing anything. Now, if we hop over to node 4, do we see E3 offline there? Let's say it's online now. So at that point, what you can do is just start swapping things over. Just keep track of what you're doing. But typically, cable pulls are the easiest thing to do. So you just pop the cable out of node 5, hop it into E3 on node 4, and vice versa. Follow where the problem goes. If it magically goes over to node 4 at that point, then we know it's good. If it doesn't go over node 4 and it stays with node 5, then it becomes SFP on the node itself or the NIC card, one of the two. So, using just deduction skills there, it's really straightforward and easy to try and figure out where some of these things lie. Now, like I said, typically it's not going to be the NIC. It's just not historically a NIC issue. Not to say it will not happen, and now I've probably cursed myself and I'll have nothing but NIC issues in my next on-call, but typically that's not the case. All right. Now, we talked about some port flapping there, and I mentioned this in regards to frame and carrier accounts out there. From a cluster perspective, let's go back one step here. A flapping port is one that's going up and down constantly. And you will see this. Easy place to look is if you pop over to the cluster. If you pull a dmessage -t, and in this case, that's a null response out there. But let's do a grep for ETH2, let's say, maybe E3. Okay, we're not getting either one of them. What you'll see out here is the Ethernet port going up and then going down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And what that comes down to is there's an error on the network at that point. So from a cluster perspective, the cluster is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's reforming quorum because it found a resource, in this case, Ethernet 2, let's say. And then it reforms quorum because it loses a resource, in this case, Ethernet 2, let's say. From an end user perspective, it's those four little words that every storage admin hates to hear. The cluster is down. Now, again, I appreciate that it's semantics. I really do. And the cluster is doing what it's supposed to be doing. But let's be honest, at the end of the day, you're not serving data. You're not making money. Let's get you back to serving data and making money out here. So when you have ports that are flapping like that, the quick and dirty thing to do is take the port offline. Little sudo command right there, the IP link set dev, take that thing down. Now, you'll ask yourself, hey, Will told me to take this down, but how do I know which one to go after? As with all things, go and look for some error messages out here. So in this case, obviously, if you have a dmessage-t that's showing you a link going up and down a lot, that's the one to go after. Barring that, our good old standby of ifconfig, he will tell you if your frame and carriers are going up, take it offline, Buttercup. That was an unfortunate rhyme. But rhyming aside, look for delta changes in that. So run an ifconfig statement, let it sit for 10, 15 seconds, run it again. If you see those numbers increasing, we got a problem on our hands. Now, in this case, the question comes down to how many increasing errors do I need to be worried about? Because again, these aren't going to be zeroed unless I reboot the node. To that degree, it's hard to say. I've seen single-digit frame errors take down a cluster because it's just constantly forming quorum at that point. So it's really taking node, making the node form quorum. Let's rephrase it that way. But I've seen single-digit errors do that. I've also seen upwards of 100 not do that. It's really a combination of what's taking place. You know, are the frame errors themselves coming from the SFP, or is that getting corrected by the switch at some point? It's really hard to say. My rule of thumb is if you see those things increasing, we have a problem on our hands. How that problem is going to manifest, well, that's going to be for the end users to let us know. But certainly, if you have flapping ports out there, offline that thing as quick as possible, and it'll make everyone's life a lot better. All righty, moving along. Cluster formation and connectivity. And I told one of my customers just yesterday that I was going to use them as an example today. So hopefully they're on the line. They can get their 15 minutes fame here. When the cluster boots up, we use IPv6 across the back end to form a cluster. In layman's terms, we'll do a broadcast of IPv6 out there, say, hey, who's out there? Come and tell me. And then we'll collect all that data, see if it matches in our cluster config. If it does, great, we form a quorum. If we don't have full IPv6 connectivity, or if it's half-baked IPv6 connectivity, then we're going to run into problems out there. So first and foremost, you've probably seen this command get tossed around your channels, and that's the quorum details. I have no idea why it's a QQ internal command. I've asked many years for to change that, and they're probably not listening to me because I talk a lot. So let's take a look at that guy. So your quorum details, you are going to have to, because there's a QQ internal command, you do have to run that out of a sudo shell. In this case, I have all nodes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I have end nodes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Where's node 1, you ask? Well, it got TPR'd out, so that's why it's not there. As long as my all nodes equal my end nodes, life is grand in cluster land. Is degraded showing false, is full is showing true. Awesome. Out nodes is showing nothing here, so this guy is in good shape. Now, let's change that up to a situation where we're actually missing nodes out here. Let's say all nodes, which we're always going to have a counter of, shows 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whereas in nodes shows 2, 4, and 6, let's say. And 3 and 5, not there. Well, that's 2 nodes out, which means in a typical situation here, you're going to support 1 node outage. But with 2 nodes out, cluster's going to be down, not serving data. It's a bad day out there. In those cases, the first thing you're looking for outside of reboot nodes and whatnot, and we are doing a session on nodes being offline, so hang tight for that one. We'll get in depth there. But from a networking perspective, first thing you can do out here, super duper easy, after you've done this, is we come over here and do this IP-6 nay show. So let's take a look at see what that does. All right. Here I have a whole bunch of stale entries and some reachable entries, and I don't have anything that's showing incomplete or failed, so I guess that's plus. Stale entries are, we had this MAC address at one point, we no longer have it. I'm sure there's a much better explanation for that, but from my networking layman terms, that's what I'm going with. What I want to see out here is enough reachables that let me form a cluster. In this case, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 5 one. Now my cluster is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nodes. Great. One of these is actually not part of this cluster because IP6 is not going to report on yourself here. But in this case, I still have enough to form a cluster. Great. That's what I'm interested in. My customer from yesterday, he had I want to say it was an 8-node cluster, and we had 4 entries out here. 2 were incomplete, 2 were reachable. And obviously for an 8-node cluster, you want to see a little more than just 4 entries out there. So that becomes a problem. So what can you do in that state? Well, from the IPv6 or IP6 relationship here, again, if I'm only showing 4 nodes and I'm expecting 8, I have a problem on the networking side. So I really need to see how my network is set up, which brings us to our next friendly command here, the LLDP CLI show nay, which is obviously different than nay show. Why should we have consistency? Because we can afford not to. So let's take a look at this guy. And this one you do have to run out of QSH, as I recall. Nope. Show nay. There we go. This will tell you who you are connected to. So in this case, Ethernet 2, he is talking to this switch, in this case, CFW QLab 1, and he's plugged into Ethernet 4/5/2. So what you can do is you can go out here and run this for nodes that aren't showing up. You can track the MAC addresses back. So let's say this guy, 3E here. If he's showing stale, and that's one that I actually want in my cluster, find out who that MAC address is. Go over to that node, run the LLDP CLI over there, and see where it's going to. The best practice for setting up a cluster is to have 2 switches there. One set of network ports goes to 1, so like ETH2 goes to switch 1, ETH3 goes over to switch 2, assuming you only have back-end networking and front ends all cabled together with it. So your best practice is to have 2 switches and one set of ports going to one set of ports going to another. What is a very common mistake that I have seen is things just get cabled wrongly, where you will see half the ports of ETH2, for example, are going to switch 1, where the other half of the cluster is going over to switch 2, and vice versa on ETH3. Now, realistically, that shouldn't make any change in the big scheme of things, but again, you can have weird issues that take place out there. So it is always worthwhile to go ahead and take a look at these from the LLDP CLI. Now, in this case, we can go back to the networking people and say, hey, I need you to take a look at this switch here, this port here, Tell me the status of it. Let's say this thing's down. And they'll come back and say, oh, it's showing suspended. At which point you're like, sweet. Go ahead and do a shut of that port, turn it offline, do a no shut, bring it back online. Again, I'm not your networking guy, so if your commands differ, by all means, please use the correct ones. But in my limited networking knowledge, that will bring that thing back up. And at that point, you can come back over here, rerun this guy, and ideally, those stale entries go away. Alternatively, let's say you do have your 2-switch setup out there, and for whatever reason, things just aren't lining up. It's not coming to fruition here. What can you do? Well, you go back to Troubleshooting 101 and make the problem as simple as possible. In this case, take Ethernet 3 out of the equation. Either going on the software side, do that sudo offline of the port, take all of Ethernet 3 down. Are you still having the problem? And if so, what are you seeing at that point? Did my 8 entries suddenly become 2 entries? Maybe I have everything cabled over to the other switch and the other switch is borked up for whatever reason. Alternatively, you could also just go back there, unplug E3 of everything, but once you start getting a large number of nodes, then that becomes sort of a logistical nightmare. But it's something you can certainly do. Now, the key thing I will say also is if we jump back a slide or two here, I think it was this guy. This command here, this is doing it only on the software side. So if you do reboot that node, that link will come back up, assuming it can. All right. So lastly here, real quick, just from a network slowness perspective, we often get, I would say it's probably the second most common issue out there is things are slow. Now, you just cast a very, very wide net at this point. And by no means is this going to be a comprehensive troubleshooting how slow things are. But what you need to go back to on the, if you have end users, as storage admins here, if you have end users telling you things are slow, we really need to know how we're defining slow. Now, I know early on I said we don't want to read a script, but in cases of slowness, this is one where you're going to want to kind of script this through so we do have a full set of answers to come back to. So how slow, how are you defining slow? How long has this been happening? One customer, one end user, multiple end users, what have you. I do a lot of work with a hospital out in the East Coast, and they have a lot of home health end users. And so they'll connect in over VPN to the cluster itself. And, when they start saying things are slow, the question you have to ask is, okay, are you down in a hauler and you just can't get a good signal out? Is that why things are slow? And that's where it comes back to, is it one client or multiple out there? A very common mistake that, or I guess I shouldn't say a mistake, but a very common problem that pops up is also antivirus. Windows Defender is notorious for this. CrowdStrike, notorious for this. I appreciate we want to have an antivirus on there. Have that be on the client, not talking to the cluster directly if you can. Typically what we'll do is say, okay, can we turn that off, or do we have a system that doesn't have that running, or set an exception for that share, and then see if the issue is still taking place. Because anytime that one of those files gets read, it's going to have to go out, get scanned, and then get sent over to the end user. So you're adding additional layers in there. And lastly, can I remove the application from the picture? If I am saying that, I don't know, Avid is slow, can I do normal operations in a speedy manner, or is it everything that's slow at that point? It is going to depend. If it's a single application, perhaps we have a workaround for that application. Perhaps there's a fix out there. If it is everything that's going to it, well, that's you approach that in a different manner. One thing you can do is do this DD command out here. This takes all of that application out of the picture. This is just straight protocol at this point. So if you got a Linux box or Unix box sitting around, you can kick this off to the share or to the export in that case. Set that count number to something crazy high and just see how long it takes to run. And this will tell you real quick whether or not this is a client/application problem or is this a cluster problem as a whole. Because if it's a cluster problem as a whole, great. Then we can take a look at the networking side of it. And then we go straight back to the early on numbers here. Do I show errors out here? Am I showing things go up and down on me all the time? And if so, then we can address those versus simply saying, well, it's slow and it's these 10 clients and it's this application. At that point, we're pigeonholed looking at that application, when in reality, the problem is something far more nefarious. So with that, like I said, pardon me, you do have the command cliff notes because we are doing summer school here. So kick back in your chair. Feel free to print these out, take them next to the cluster, and have them at the ready. Lastly, and I don't see any questions out here, so if you do have any, by all means, feel free to kick them out in the Slack channel. But lastly, we are out on Reddit. If you're not there already, please go pop over there. I do toss a lot of tips and one-liners out there. If you are part of the Qumulo community channel, I believe it is, where the Grump Squat lists monthly tips out there, a lot of those get mirrored out there as well. And we also have pictures of my dogs. So go for that if nothing else. Alrighty. Next month, Note Offline. Now what? OMG, this is bad news. So next month, we are going to be focusing on that whole little bit that we just went through today in regards to looking at a quorum detail and seeing what we can do about that, how we go about fixing things there. Spoiler alert, a lot of it is networking. Alrighty. Well, attendees, I hope you have a lovely day ahead of yourselves. If you do have any questions, by all means, feel free to kick it out to the channels. And either myself or one of our lovely CSE assistants will be happy to jump in and answer any and all questions you have. Doesn't have to be network related. And if you just want to see pictures of my dogs, I'm happy to kick those out there too. So without further ado, if you see any talking dogs today, by all means, feed them tacos. And we'll talk to you in a month. Bye.